everybody. Welcome to the It Hurts to Mom podcast. I'm Lauren Rose, and today we're talking about the lived experience of chronic pain, or what does it feel like to live with chronic pain every day? Our guest is Deana Tsiapalis. She's the chief curator and head pain coach at Pain to Possibilities, an educator and a podcaster looking to spread a message of hope that there is much more to chronic pain than just pills and procedures. Welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I always look forward to these conversations for sure.
Yeah, I think this one's going to be really interesting and pretty in depth. So I think
Yeah.
it'll be great.
Yeah. And for our listeners, before we press the record button, we talked about how, this might bring about some of the emotions. And if it does, we can always just press pause, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience with chronic illness.
Sure. So, first of all, I'm a mom of three. My lovely husband was born with a rare metabolic disorder. So I kind of come at it as for sure, a witness to what my husband and my daughter have experienced with chronic illness. I was witness to my parents as well, struggling with their health and dying prematurely, in my humble opinion. And then I'm also an intermittent pain gal with migraines. So I have seen both sides of the coin. I would say probably bigger as a witness. I really have observed over the years working with chronic pain, with the chronic pain community, how it affects the day to day, how it affects our emotions, how it affects our relationships. And so I'm thankful that I've sort of have more of that observatory position as opposed to living with it, because I know what havoc it wreaks. So I've been able to learn a ton from, our chronic pain community, but also just those in my family who have been through it too.
Yeah, so we're going to go through a lot of different emotions that we experience. The first one I want to talk about is grief, because I think it's really important when someone is diagnosed with a chronic illness or chronic pain that they really take time to grieve the diagnosis and everything that they maybe have lost. I had to do that. When I had to stop working in
Mm-hmm.
2017, I spent about 2 years in a really deep depression. I didn't realize at the time that I was grieving, but I was.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I was grieving not just the fact that I couldn't work anymore, so the loss of my job, but the loss of my career, the loss of a lot of my functionality, the
Right.
loss of part of my identity, and worst of all, the loss of my purpose in life. I felt like, we all feel like our jobs are our purpose sometimes.
Right. Yeah.
And I didn't have that anymore. And I didn't know what my purpose in life was, because it surely wasn't to take care of my family, because I couldn't do that very well because I was in too much pain all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So how have you seen grief kind of show up in your life or in other people's lives?
Right. Oh, we're starting off with a big one. This is a good one
Hmm.
because you're right. I don't know that people really identify that that's what they're going through when they're going through it, and I think we need to call that out and talk about it. Uh, Grief. I've been through it myself. I know I've witnessed it, of course, with my daughter. She's 22, so at a young age, 22, she's sort of going through her own grief. And talking to my husband about his experience with grief, I think the most important thing is, like you just said, is to acknowledge it. That gives you the space to be able to walk through that grief. Because if we get stuck in our day to day, and I think that's more than likely what you went through. I think by the sounds of it, you didn't really know you were going through the grief process until later, right? Which is okay too. But to acknowledge that we are going through it is one thing. That way you can articulate it to your family, to your friends, that, hey, I just need a little space right now to be able to work through this, to walk through this. But it makes me sad too, because it's not, it's such a big part of the chronic pain experience. No one really guides you through that unless you seek out help, but when you're often going through it and not knowing you're going through it, you're not going to know to ask for help, right? So, yeah, I think when it comes to grief, yes, we need to acknowledge it. Yes, we can take steps to walk through it. You may even have a better answer than I do as far as what you found really helped you to walk through that grief. Did you have any sort of, aha moments or things that helped you the most?
Well, what ended up helping me the most were two things. One, intentional daily gratitude. So realizing everything that I still had and everything that I still could do, even if it hurt to do it, or if it was
Yeah,
difficult, or if I had to modify the task to do it.
right.
And two, realizing at some point that my life didn't have to be over. I
Hmm.
had basically thought that I had no purpose in life and my life was broken and meaningless and purposeless.
Mm.
And I came out of my grieving process realizing that that didn't have to be the case. I could do something about that. And I wish I'd realized I was going through the grieving process at the time because I would have given myself that space, like you're talking about. I would
Mm-hmm.
have honored what I was going through and I would have either sought help or done more journaling or
Right.
something and really felt it. All I felt was just severe depression.
Right.
And so I was kind of trying to run away from the depression as opposed to really leaning into it, which I
Mhm.
think I would have done if I'd known I was grieving.
Right. And that's a space to get to, meaning it took a lot of work to get there, right? And unfortunately we don't have that guidance up front. But you're right. There's so much to unpack there. Like, first of all, you explained the chronic pain experience perfectly, right? That loss of purpose, not necessarily living by our values, grieving the life you once knew, the relationships you once had, the job you once had, all that stuff. So to acknowledge that first up front and to allow that space to say, hey, you know, I have a new life now, which I know we're going to get into acceptance. It all kind of
Mhm.
folds into one, but yeah, that's a tough process. And I think if we can, allow for time, guidance, understanding of what the grief process actually is, what it looks like, what it's going to feel like. I love that you tapped into the whole gratitude thing because perspective is a very big part of, maybe not the very first part of grief. You need to go through the tough parts up front around just being sad and being angry and all those emotions, right? Eventually we can get to a place of, gratitude, but it is such an important part of that perspective piece, understanding that, wow, okay, this sucks, but there's a but, I can do this, or I can, I got through the worst part of it. And there's just so much more to talk about, but that's just sort of the general sense is that, yeah, if we can acknowledge it first, allow space for it for a second, and then, work through the steps, because there are steps to grief and you've already done it intuitively. So,
Yeah, and grief can look, different for different people. So mine manifested, there was some anger there. I was angry at my body. I felt like my body had betrayed
mm,
me, but
mhm.
mostly it was depression. But it could be anger, it could be avoidance, it could be all sorts of things. So,
All of the
you know,
above, right?
exactly. So your grief might not look like my grief, and that's fine.
Right.
That's normal.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Right. And I think it's important to acknowledge that as well, because, we are so hard on ourselves that we'd be thinking, oh, I'm not even grieving properly. When that's just
yeah,
putting extra pressure on ourselves. Right. So I think it's just, and I love that you were journaling because it's really important to be able to tap into what those emotions are, to kind of just be present and say, oh, you know what, right now I'm feeling really sad, or I'm really frustrated, or so to write those things down, to put it on paper, to get it out of you is a huge tool in the grief tools.
right.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Especially for someone who doesn't really like talking about my feelings,
Right.
writing them is so much easier.
It's true. And it's just for you. I mean, you could show it to someone if you wanted to, but it really is just for you, right? And how powerful that can be. And as far as the gratitude, too, a lot of listeners might be saying, what? Like, how does that work? How do you find that? I remember that's one thing that helped me through. So my mom passed away at the age of 54.
Mhm.
And one of my coping mechanisms was to find something that was a positive of it, or something that was utilitarian about it. Like, how can I make this not so awful? And I thought to myself, well, I tried to do a bit of a reframe or a perspective shift, which was, you know what, I'm the youngest of four. She did her job. She was under so much stress that I don't want her to be that way anymore, to feel that way anymore. I mean, that she's done her job. So that really helped me to get through that initial stage of grief. So it's the same thing, for our chronic pain community, coming to the perspective like you had, where it's like, okay, I'm still alive. I still can do certain things. I have my family and my friends around me. That sort of idea is important to focus on, as opposed to what we've lost, at least for a little while.
Right. Absolutely. Because I mean, our brains are neuroplastic. So the more we're we're focusing on positive things and on gratitude, the more
Yeah.
our brains are going to automatically think positively. And the opposite is completely true. So when we're just thinking negatively, that's where our brains are going to go first, is to the
Right.
negative. But we can
Right.
change that. And it's
Yeah.
so powerful to know that we can change that.
Right. And you're a great example. I'm sorry, I'm asking you questions too. Is that okay? Like I feel that.
You're good.
Okay. I think it's just so helpful for our listeners. But what was it that helped you to kind of start writing, pick up that pen and paper? Did someone tell you about it? Was it something that was in you felt you needed to do?
Yeah, it's just in me because I've been a writer my whole life. I love to journal and I love to write different things. So it just, like you said, getting it out there, pen to paper. I feel like when I keep things inside of me,
Mm.
they make me sick, you
Yeah.
know, with chronic pain or with depression or with anxiety or whatever it is. But when I
Yeah.
get them out, it helps a little bit. So it's not just a hidden secret inside of me anymore. It's actually it kind of takes away some of the power to write
Yeah.
it down.
Absolutely. Good. That's fantastic. Yeah. And I think even for the grief process, if you can just write down what you're feeling in that moment, A, to get it out, and B, when you felt you had the space to be able to look back at it, you can kind of spend a bit of time thinking through it or contemplating it, or, how am I feeling now that I got that out? There's a lot of exploratory territory there as well.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the next experiences I want to talk about are kind of intertwined but different. So shame and guilt.
Mm,
So shame, feeling like you're a bad person, and guilt, feeling like you've done something wrong.
right.
So I experienced both of those depending kind of on the day. I feel a lot of guilt about things that I can't do. Like at the
Mm,
end of the day, if I have not done the dishes, I feel guilty about that because I've had to spend all day in bed resting. And
mm,
sometimes I feel like a bad wife and a bad mom and a bad
mm,
daughter and a bad sister-in-law and a bad friend because I can't always make social gatherings and I
right.
can't play with my daughter as much as I want, and I can't have date nights with my husband and things like that.
Yeah.
So have you seen that in, your
Right.
life and other people's lives too?
Oh gosh, yeah, shame is a big one. And all of those things you listed out, that's a lot, right? That's a big load to carry. Shame is a really one of the most powerful experiences and powerful emotions that we have. And so, I looked it up in the dictionary just for fun, just to see kind of what perspective it is. And this is what it says. No wonder we're feeling all the feels.
Mm.
It says shame is a painful feeling of humiliation or distress consciousness of wrong or foolish doing, which is awful because it's, making us feel already. I mean, we already feel this way, but making feel that you've done something wrong, right? And you haven't done anything wrong. If anything, when you say no to going out for a date night, it's because you're trying to read your body and read the messages. There's a tipping point there, obviously, but it's not that you're doing anything wrong. And the shame comes in for many reasons, whether it be from ourselves and feeling like we can't keep up or like we can't do all those things that we wanted to do and feeling shame as a result of it, or from the greater picture, our society as, this perfectionist society and this doing society that we live in, putting the pressure on us to perform. We're very performance based. And so it puts a lot of extra pressure on the community to be able to, well, to feel like crap, essentially, right? So when it comes to shame, again, I'm going to go back to, first of all, it's important to understand that you're feeling those emotions. Whether you write it down, whether you acknowledge it. Just the other day, I had a great conversation with my husband, and I said, you know what? When it comes to the business, I'm actually feeling some shame. And he's a business owner too, and he was feeling the same way. So I felt so much better just having that conversation with someone. I know not everybody has that, and that's where the writing comes in. You have a safe space to be able to talk about it. But yeah, shame comes from all those things you talked about, the not being able to do, not being able to produce, not being able to. But if we can spend some time to sort of flip that narrative and then focus on the things that you can do, at least that's just a start. Even if it's one or two things, I know that I can do the laundry for 10 minutes and then take a break. Or I know that I may not be able to go out with friends and sit for 4 hours at a concert, but I know that I can invite them over for a half an hour coffee break or something like that. If we can sort of flip that narrative, it's hard to do up front, but that's going to at least help sort of push that shame away. But yeah, shame is huge. One of the emotions we need to work through. And then as far as the guilt, I do believe they play off each other. We feel, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Are we feeling shame because we're feeling guilty we can't get things done? I think especially being female, and moms, we tend to really layer that guilt on, even more so, especially in the chronic pain community. I'm not a good mom. I can't keep up with my kids. Well, you really are. I mean, if anything, I think you are a superhero mom because you're doing all those things. Yes, you're experiencing pain, but you're still, doing your parenting job as best as you can. So anyway, they do fit in together. I do believe hand in hand. And I think you've started with the most powerful ones. Those are probably the biggest emotions to work through bit by bit. It's going to take a lot of time and patience and practice, right? It's not easy to say those words to yourself. I am a good mother, or I am doing the best that I can.
Yeah, I think that's really key. Just reminding yourself that you are doing the best you can. And your kids are probably healthy and safe and fairly happy. Like
Right,
my daughter, she's 10, and I've had chronic pain of some sort for as long as she's been alive and even before then. So she doesn't know any different,
right,
but she knows that I do try my best. Sometimes I physically cannot play with her. There's just no way around it.
yeah,
But if I can and I can modify the task, I will, lie on the couch and play a board game with her. And she'll,
right,
spin the little wheel and move all the pieces. All I have to do is lie there and be talking with her and
right,
spending that time engaging with her. And she doesn't care.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
or I can lay on her bed and play Barbies. And sometimes I do the voices. She moves them all around because I can't
right,
sit up. It hurts too badly to do that.
right,
And she's okay with that. She doesn't care. So,
yeah,
my biggest, you know, tip is just find ways to modify what you're doing with your kids
yeah.
because all they really care about is getting that attention from you.
Absolutely. And I think you said it without saying it, is that just being present with them has
Mhm.
huge value that we tend to sort of forget that your presence with your children, you're there. You may not be playing exactly as your neighbor's playing with her daughter, but it doesn't matter. You are still present. You're still there with her doing the best that you can, right? So,
Absolutely. And being
yeah,
present is my number one tip for living with
yeah,
chronic pain and illness is just being present,
yeah.
especially with your kids, but also with your family or your friends or whoever you have relationships with.
Right. And even if you can take those moments for yourself, whether we decide to pursue this topic or not, but just, I don't know if mindfulness is the best word for it, but just sort of being there in that moment, noticing what's going on is so helpful for the biology of pain. It just takes your thoughts away from the pain itself and being present in that moment with your 10-year-old daughter. Way healthier.
Absolutely. Any kind of distraction
Mhm.
can, take away a little bit of the pain or even just help us forget that we have pain for half a second.
Yeah.
And that's a great escape.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's good for your daughter too. So if anything, I
Mhm.
think one thing that we get tripped up on is how we're communicating. If we are in pain, there's a large part of our community who will just push through because they feel the guilt, they feel the shame, which is going to wreak havoc on their emotions, on their physical state as well, right? So, by being courageous enough to say, hey guys, I'm a little sore today. I still want to hang out with you, but this is what's going to serve me the best. This is how I'm going to be able to do it. Right. So I think it's important to have those conversations too, which I'm sure you're having with your daughter regularly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it's good for her too.
Oh yeah, we talk about, how I'm doing and, what I need her to do for me for herself, what I
Mhm.
need her to be more independent on. And if
Mhm.
I'm having a really bad pain day, she knows if, I can play with her for 20 minutes, then I'll say that. But yeah,
Yeah.
we talk about it a lot because I
Yeah.
mean, this is an everyday thing for me. My pain
Right.
doesn't go away.
Right.
So it has to be a near constant conversation. And I don't do it in a way where I'm complaining to her all the time because that's not going to serve her well. I don't want her to see that side of me. I don't want her to really see how miserable I am all the time, but
Mm.
it's more of just a factual thing. Mommy's back and hips are hurting, so
Mhm.
I can only play for a few minutes, or I can play with you like this.
Yeah, exactly. And you're starting off on the positive. You're like, I can do this, but I'm going to have to modify, right? That's just for her to be picking up on that is amazing. So well done, mommy.
Yeah. No, she's great. She's absolutely great. I'm lucky that she's very compassionate and loving and
Yeah.
nurturing. So she's
Yeah.
very good about letting me modify tasks and be there for her in the way that I can be. So I'm
Right.
very
And
blessed.
you're part of that equation too. Like, I mean, the way you have, worked with your daughter and communicated with your daughter, is teaching her compassion. So
Mm.
yeah, good teamwork, I'd say.
Thanks. So let's move kind of to the brighter side, more positive things. So
Yeah.
let's talk about acceptance, because there does have
Right.
to come a point when we accept our diagnosis or our
Yeah.
diagnoses.
Yeah.
And the Chronic Pain Anonymous Association, it's similar to, like, Alcoholics Anonymous and things like that. They've
Mhm.
actually got a 12-step program, and their first step is admitting that you are powerless over your chronic pain. And
Mm,
that doesn't mean we're not going to do anything about our pain to try to make it better. It just means that our pain is there. It's a part of
yeah.
us, it's a part of our lives.
Yeah.
And the sooner we accept that, the easier time we're going to have moving forward.
Right. Yeah. Acceptance is such a huge part of improving your life with pain, right? It's one of those words that can be a bit of a hot button word. A lot of people within the community who haven't done the work or haven't done the learning that you've had, I think that word is really difficult. So, but acceptance doesn't necessarily mean, you just got to suck it up and just get on with it. Acceptance is, yes, understanding that you are here now, you have a new deal on life, you have been delivered something, you have a diagnosis or whatever it is. This is what it is. And so, but there's so much more to acceptance than that. It's one of the things that I love most about coaching is this thing called ACT. You may have learned this in your training along the way as well, but it's called the acceptance and commitment, either therapy or it doesn't even have to be therapy. Like anyone can use this. And so the acceptance piece comes in where, not even at the beginning, but kind of towards the end, where we're working through flexible thinking, flexible behavior. And, it takes a bit of work to get to the point where you're like, okay, this is my deal. This is going to be for the rest of my life, because more likely you're going to have the pain for the rest of your life. There are the odd few who will be able to move on from pain, but 90% of the time, we are going to be living with pain for the rest of our lives. But we can and absolutely can improve things a little bit, right? Just so that you can get back to feeling like there's a bit of joy in your life, right? Or there's a bit of purpose in your life, or that you're living to your values, all that stuff. Acceptance, and I know we're going to talk about it a little bit, but one of the first steps in acceptance, and you can say, Deana, I don't agree with that, but I think self-compassion really comes into this whole self acceptance of our new situation, our new norm. So we'll get into that one, but just kind of keep that in the back of our hats. But yeah, I think it's crucial to be able to get to the point where you're like, okay, this is my new life. This is what I've been given. How can I then make things better? Not get rid of the pain, but how can I actually get to a point where I feel like I am either working towards contentment or working towards improving my life or my experience or my relationship with pain? That's all part of the acceptance thing too.
Right. And I don't want anybody to mistake acceptance for defeat. You know,
Right. Yes.
So let's be careful there. It's
Yeah.
just understanding that you do have some kind of pain that is probably going to not go away. So how
Right.
can you best live your life and be your best self
Yeah.
despite the pain that you're feeling?
Absolutely. Because we know that warring with the pain, that constant trying to get rid of the pain in itself makes pain worse,
Mhm.
biologically, psychologically, socially. So it's a tough thing to move beyond. And it's also tough to move beyond too, because biologically, that's the way the brain is set up. Once we do something long enough, think something believe something long enough, that becomes our default. And so, but you're right, it's not about giving up. If anything, it's a pivot, I think, right? As opposed to resigning yourself to, you know, this is life. It's a pivot. So
No, that's a great way to describe it as a pivot. I love that.
mm,
So let's get into self-compassion since it is such a big part of acceptance.
yeah. So self-compassion, again, some people are like, ugh, I don't like that word. My kids don't like it if I bring it up. But self-compassion is really just talking to yourself, caring for yourself in a way that you would to a friend or a loved one. It's if you had a friend who was dealing with struggle, who lived with pain or lived with chronic illness or something invisible, would you really speak that way to them as you do to yourself? Likely not. And so self-compassion is really about allowing a little bit of a space to be able to be kind to yourself. And I know that sounds really out there, but listening to what the chatter is and then being able to unhook from that chatter. That's a sort of a way forward in self-compassion. Hearing the words you're saying to yourself, perhaps hearing the words you're saying to others when you are in a lot of pain. And then the self-compassion piece comes in to say, okay, I know that I'm saying these words because I'm in a lot of pain. Okay, so how do I allow myself a little kindness to be able to say, hey, I'm having a tough day. And I know that I can get through this, but I also know that I'm capable of dealing with this. So it's really, again, a pivot, a reframe of those words that we're telling ourselves, that narrative that we have in our head, to something more helpful, more healthy, more positive, more kind, more compassionate.
And I would argue that parts of self-compassion include, a word that I hate, which is, self-care, but,
Mm,
doing things to take care of yourself, whether that's, making sure you get a shower and brush your teeth or doing something that
right,
you love, whether
right.
that's, listening to your body and honoring that your body needs to rest or needs to
Yeah,
stop your activity. It
yeah,
could mean, self-compassion could mean going and getting therapy or taking medications
right.
because you're anxious or depressed about what's going on. There are so
Yeah.
many things that I think self-compassion can encompass, but I
Mm-hmm.
think it's really important to get to that point. And I think I'm there most of the time,
Yeah,
not every day. Every day is not great.
for
There are
sure.
some days where I've got the shame and the guilt that are taking over, but I think I have gotten to the point where I do have a lot of compassion for myself
Mm-hmm.
because I think mainly because my husband has a lot of compassion for me and he doesn't ever make me feel less than or inadequate because I can't do things during the day.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really helped me get to a good place where
Yeah.
I can feel compassion for myself.
Absolutely. And the where it comes even more important to have some practice of self-compassion is when you don't have those people around you,
Mm.
which makes it harder, but that's when you need the most, which is difficult, right? So sometimes just listening to other people's words. So that's why your podcast is so important. Even if people don't either believe in self-compassion or are not necessarily practicing it, a good place to start is just to hear your words, about ways that you're dealing with self-compassion so that it's just sort of a thought up front. It's just okay, this is A, what self-compassion is, and B, sounds like, it's really helping you, and what the words that you're using for them to hear as well. So I'm going to put it back on you. What are some of the, when you're having one of those moments where you're stuck in that guilt or the shame, what sort of words are you saying to yourself to try and find that self-compassion?
I really just tried to remind myself that I have to listen to my body because if I don't, I'm going to regret it later.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
and also, like I mentioned earlier, just reminding myself that I am trying my hardest.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Anytime you can, start a sentence with I am or I can or I'm doing, and then if you need to end it off with but I need to modify or I need to pace it out or I need to take a break. That's extremely healthy. That's an example of self-compassion. And then it's just kind of checking in, every once in a while, when you hear those words, first of all, you got to be aware that they're there. So it takes a pause to say, okay, I just got off a phone call with someone. I'm so angry. My pain is amplified as a result of it. It's kind of taking a second and going, okay, so what words am I hearing in my head right now? Like, what's the narrative in my head? What am I trying to tell myself? Like, am I hearing, oh my God, you spoke too quickly on that call, or, you don't know what you're talking about, or, all these things that you could possibly tell yourself when something's going wrong. And it's just kind of a pause to check in with what those words are. Because if you're not aware of what you're telling yourself, it's really hard to practice self-compassion. So it kind of starts with awareness. And then beyond that, starting to, again, pivot and switch the narrative to at least just one word,
Mm.
one word at a time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's just really important
Mhm.
because sometimes we're not going to get compassion from the world, from society. So
Yeah.
we've got to get it from somewhere, and we're better to get it than from ourselves.
Right. And, the first example that comes in my head is one of the tougher ones. And maybe you'll have a good suggestion too. But, the thing that our community experiences so often is the parking spot allocation, right? So you're going into a designated parking spot, and you get out of the car and you're walking, and people give you the look or give you the words, or they leave a note on your car that you shouldn't be parked there. How do you show yourself self-compassion in that moment? It can be really difficult, right? And so, have you had that experience? I'm just wondering if you have any
Yeah.
examples for the listeners.
Well, I've had a designated parking spot for the last several years since I was in my late 30s, and I'm 43 now. So
Mm,
I always worry that somebody's going to say something to me and I'm going to feel absolutely terrible.
mm,
But what I kind of prepare myself to say is, well, my doctor and my government think that I need this spot,
right.
but I haven't had anybody say anything to me yet.
Okay, that's
I do feel like it's gonna happen, and I'm always scared that it's gonna happen. I mean, the only way that somebody would know that I might need that is that I walk with a limp.
mhm,
Um, but other than that, I'm not in a wheelchair and I'm not using a walker.
mhm.
So I do always worry that people are going to say something or tell me that I'm too young, for that, to which I would probably say I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah. Oh, I know. And that's another thing that people hate hearing too is you're too young. Like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like
Anyway,
I know.
yeah. Yes, I am. I agree. Um, sorry, I don't know why I brought that example up, but I think, in that moment, if someone is really either worried about what they're going to hear, the pushback they might get, or if they actually are hearing it, what sort of words can they have in their bag of tricks, so to speak, to help them through that moment? How can you sort of pull some words into your thoughts that in that moment when it's causing you a lot of stress, just
Hmm.
maybe think of those words up front so that you have them. But yeah, anyway, takes a bit of
Yeah.
practice. A little preparatory work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, and that's definitely a hard one because that's been one on me. And I mean, for the first couple of years that I had that, I tried not to use it. And
Mm-hmm.
and I still, if there are three spots, I won't take the first spot. I'll try to leave that for someone who's,
Mm-hmm.
even worse than I am. You
Mm-hmm.
know, or if there's a similar spot that's close, I'll take that one instead.
Yeah.
But for the first couple of years, I felt so guilty
Mm.
that I despised using it. My husband would make me use it when I needed to. He'd be
Uh,
like, "Babe, you need it today. We've really got to do this."
yeah. Yeah.
But it's gotten a little bit better, but I still kind of hate it because I'm just so afraid
Yeah.
of what people are going to think and say.
Right. I know. And that's a hard thing because it's hard to kind of go from that point to listening to your own needs and how, it's
Mhm.
not going to serve you well if you don't take that spot, right? Especially on a higher pain day. So it's a tough gap to fill.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So the last thing I want to talk about is hope. And
Mhm.
some people, do eventually get out of chronic pain through different procedures or, mind body methods or, medications, whatever the case may be. A lot
Mhm.
of people won't. So how can we still have some kind of hope, even if we're not necessarily going to get out of pain?
Right. Well, I'm glad you're ending off on hope because I think it's important
Yeah.
to finish off on. I think where the hope comes from, and so much of our chronic pain community is really savvy about doing the homework, right? Understanding where their pain comes from. There's a large portion that's not doing that. They're just kind of relying on what their doctor said. But I will say point blank, there is hope. There's so much research in the last 12, 13 years that is coming out around what chronic pain is, where it comes from, how it works, how multi-system it is, how it's impacted by everything. So the more you know about how chronic pain works, the better you can then start to do the work to start to feel safe in your body, to start to practice self-compassion, to then, work on those deep emotions like guilt and shame, and put certain strategies into practice, like what you're going to do at the parking spot when someone says something. So there is hope. There's so much research coming out. It's not necessarily being filtered out down to the chronic pain community, but it's out there. So, the more that you listen to these podcasts, the more you talk to people, like someone who lives with it, who understands, right, is important. The hope is that because we know the brain, and you said it earlier, is neuroplastic, right? It can change. It's highly adaptable. For everything that causes more pain, there is an equal amount of things that we can do to dial down that pain. And so that's the hope. The hope is that neuroplasticity and how we can change the brain to be able to help with the biological, the psychological, and the social aspects that pain is. So community is important, being with people who understand it. So having those open, honest conversations with people, that support system that you have, people around you who are helping you through it. That's the hope.
Right. And there is a place of joy that can come despite chronic pain. I would say that I'm in that place right now. I'm doing things that I love. I'm helping people through my podcast. I've got a small community of women with chronic pain that, I meet with every week.
Oh,
And I have severe pain every day, but life is pretty good.
yeah.
And yes, I
Mm,
would prefer not to have this pain.
mm,
However, I'm fairly content with it. I've accepted it. I've got compassion for myself and I've got joy that, I wasn't feeling for those couple of years when I was grieving. I didn't think I was ever going to get back to a place of joy.
for
I
sure.
thought my life was completely over, but my life is not over.
No, and it's such a great message, and so many more people need to hear it. There are so many people stuck in that I will never find joy again. And it's so sad. So that's why your voice, your message is really important to hear that. Yeah, if you're willing to put in the work, and that's the thing, it is work, right? And it's time. We're so used to having the one quick fix. That's just what our biomedical model does. If you are willing to put in the time and the effort, there are success stories like yours, where you're working towards contentment. You are finding joy. You are living joy. You are living by your values. You're finding a purpose. Your podcast, amazing. Right? So it can be done.
Absolutely. And it's not easy. It wasn't quick. It wasn't
No,
easy,
no,
but it's possible.
exactly. And because you have people around you, to help pull you through those tough days, that's that's golden. You can't put a price tag on that. So yeah. So well done. Well done, I say, on working your butt off to make it happen.
Thanks. All right. What advice do you have for people that are living with chronic pain?
Right. Ah, I put a lot of thought into this one. Just as far as belief, I think a belief is really important. Hope and belief are really important. So where are you right now in your belief of capability? So if you're really stuck in the pain and you believe there is nothing else you can do, doesn't offer a lot of hope. But if you are just sort of allowing the door open a little bit to allow some of that hope in, some of that belief in that you are capable of pivoting, you are capable of trying to do things differently because what's working right now is not working for you. So doing something differently, allow that door to open up a little bit more. Believe that you have some capabilities to rein in some of the control and dial down some of that pain. And that's where the hope lies. When you can kind of see that light coming in through the door that, okay, Lauren did it. Maybe I can too. So I think belief and hope go together. And that would be my last tidbit.
No, I think that's great. So where can we get more information about you and about what you do?
So, a few different ways. I also have a podcast. It's called The Chronic Pain Experience. You're welcome to dive into content there. I do have a membership site exclusively for those who live with chronic pain. I have a community that we're just getting started on that is a learning path, as well as community support, as well as a curated library for everything to do with chronic pain. You can find that at paintopossibilities.com. So that's pain number 2 possibilities.com. And you can reach out to me anytime. If you go to my website, there's a contact page. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me that way. So, yeah.
Perfect. And I'll have those in the show notes in case anybody wants to look there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lauren.
Thanks for coming on.
It's nice to hang out with you.
Yeah, same here. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any health, parenting, or life advice. For my freebie 30 ways to relieve pain without taking a pill, go to ithurtstomom.com/tips. If you have any comments, suggestions, or want to be on this podcast, email me at ithurtstomom@gmail.com. I wish everybody a blessed and pain-free day. Bye.